Let me relate to two issues that you mentioned, the issues of mistakes. I had my shares of mistakes a lot. I think that in management in general, if you don't make mistakes, it means you don't get close to your potential, close to your boundaries, and you probably don't even know what your boundaries and potential are. So I think you should make mistakes, and the idea is taking the responsibility and keep on working. Do not make huge mistakes, because then you probably will not recover. So I think like in many things in life, probably the most important thing, if you do not make mistakes, you probably don't do a good work. And if you did a huge mistake, you will not get a chance to make another mistake. So the idea is like between me and my wife, balance, do the right things, balance short and long term correctly, short and long run correctly, balance, do it right. I think that's the things to do. She did not, I did.
The balance means that he says also, okay, dear. That's what he meant. I think that the issue of mistakes is an extremely important question as a manager. Part of the daily dealing is how do you motivate your persons, your people who work for you, to invent, to do new things. And the question, how do you punish or do you punish them if they do mistake, is a crucial question in your management style. And it's also a very crucial issue in a culture of an organization. You have to be aware that if you don't reward on attempts, people will not go on with any attempt. And if you don't have attempts, you don't have successes. So if I have to go back to the business school, that would be one of the major issues that I would deal with students. You have to be very patient with mistakes, and you have to encourage people doing mistakes, because then they try. Now, please notice that I ran away from the question, what was my mistake? I spoke about the manager's mistake, okay? But in all fairness, you see, you did a fantastic job, yeah. But I can share with you a tendency to mistake, which I think many of us in the Israeli community do when we go out and we meet other cultures. We are impatient. We are very good in doing things. I think it's part of the military training that we get, and we do things. We don't just speak. Do it, go on it. And sometimes it's a mistake. Because when you try to convince someone on something that you are very convinced, and hopefully you are very right, that person has to accept it, and it takes time. You're expecting the other side to change his or her opinion. It doesn't go instantly. And that's one mistake that I can share with you. We are very fast. We think that efficiency is the top value. Maybe we are right, but it takes time to get to most efficient ways of doing business. Thank you.
I like the last discussion, because I think we have to separate mistakes from failures, right? And failures are often good, right? Remember, it took Edison 1,000 times to get the light bulb right, and we have to go through that. And I think one of the important things that we have to do in failures is make them learning events for our organizations, right? And turning those into things that make the organizations better in the process, and teaching and learning from those, so that next time you make new mistakes, not old ones, right? You make sure you're always making new ones. Personally, I think there's two areas that I would say for my own mistakes in my career that I would emphasize. One is when I knew the right thing to do and I didn't do it, or didn't do it soon enough, right? And I didn't have enough of the convictions of exercising it. One of the project that ended up being a failure at Intel under my leadership was one that I did not make a definitive enough, hard enough decision to fund it properly, right, at the right point in time. right? And let corporate reasons and other things like that allow it to starve that project. And eventually it failed because it wasn't far enough along in its development before technology had moved forward. And right, sometimes the role of a leader, right, is to make those tough decisions despite a lot of others around you giving you every indication that that's the wrong one or not the safe one, et cetera. So making those tough decisions at the right time and holding to the strength of your convictions. The second then is around people. And a person in a leadership, management, or team role who is not being successful, and particularly if they're in some form of management role, is doing nobody any good. It's not good for that manager because they're not being successful. Their peers know they're not being successful. You know they're not making you more successful, and their employees know that they're not helping them. And so why do you leave that person in that role? Just because you're soft? Just because it's nice? Just because your culture says that you should treat people well, right? You're not doing anybody favors by not making those hard people decisions when they need to be made, and make sure that you get a high-performing team. And as a manager and as a leader, that means you need to make the hard decisions of taking the low performers, the blockers, the people out of the team. And I know in my career, right, there have been too many cases where, right, I've sort of batted an eye toward making those right people decisions at the right time.
One addition, and then there was another question here. This issue of failure is vitally important. I have the luxury of working with governments around the world. Russia comes to mind, China comes to mind, in trying to build a kind of entrepreneurial culture that you've so successfully achieved here. In many cultures, failure itself is over-penalized. And you could over-penalize failure at a country level through lots of ways. Through tax systems that don't allow for deductions of losses, through legal systems that sue your backside off if something goes wrong, or through a culture, and Japan comes to mind, Pat, you mentioned Japan, that in many cases it's better not to have tried than to have tried and failed. And so I think this is really important, not just at the country level, or at the company level, but also at the country level.
It's a great point. There's a question right here in the second row.
Send it down that one.
Thank you. My name is Paul Ohana. I am from Paris, and my field of activity is consulting on management, and more specifically on human resources. I would like to share with the panel a concern that I'm having during this day. The key question that has been discussed is coping with change and reinventing yourself and reinventing the organization. I'm just wondering how you do it. Are you changing your people every 5 years? Are you changing the organization every 5 years? How do you deal with the generation gap? How do you deal with experience? And how you deal with personal loyalty and company's loyalty? These are very, very practical questions. Change is wonderful, but how you go about it? Thank you.
Me? He's sitting next to you.
I don't want to pick on him too much because he's close.
Okay, I'll say something about it. There is a very easy answer to it. Very good education. You do not want to, I think it's immoral to fire 58 years old people. I think, and you should not do it unless they are criminals or you have to close the firm or something like this. I think that we owe a lot to society. A good society is a society when most people are happy most of the time, when they are young, middle-aged, and old. So I think the way to do it is to prepare in advance that your life, during your lifetime, that's your role. Mine doesn't make any difference, is to have good education and keep coming and studying all your life, throughout your life, so you'll be able to change. Change is A, move from one profession to the next, B, knowledgeable, and also understand that you have to do that. Now, you don't have to stick, there is a new strand of literature coming right now. What will happen with people who are 55, 60 years old? In the high tech, at least in Israel, this is a young people industry. So what do you do with the 45s who already made a minor exit? 25, we discussed it before, $25 million exit, you did quite well. It's unlikely you'll have another exit because there are a lot of things that need to happen in order for you to make another exit. You made $20,000 a month, you are 45 years old, your firm is out, you did very well, exit. What do you do next? Either you become entrepreneur by yourself, but it is not very likely that you'll do very well, or you work with a couple of people, then it's more likely you do very well, or you become an employee of another firm. So I think the answer for this is, first of all, to acknowledge that what is good for society, to be very, very educated throughout your life. And here the government comes to, I think that everyone has to be at least an undergraduate, everyone can do it, and keep on studying on your life. And if you have a firm with a large number of employees, make sure your employees are being retrained all the time in what they do in your firm. So when you have to change, and every firm changes, you can keep on most of your employees and do something well, or at least give them a chance in other firms. So the name of the game is education. Your own, my own, and the government through regulation and through understanding that that's where we are going to.
It's very successful firms, organizations are very hard to change because they're being successful, right? And the very inertia, systems, processes, people, leadership that has made them successful are those that are the most unwilling to drive change because they are holding the success of the status quo. So driving change to me, right, requires, right, extraordinary leadership, right, to create that change. And a couple of thoughts specifically, some of my management rules. One is never waste a crisis, right? Because as crises come, you want to use those as vehicles to drive fundamental change. Secondly, today's successes are the very things that swallow tomorrow's opportunities, right? Because you can't free up resources to go change and attack those new opportunities. You have to kill existing projects, you have to free and protect resources to go start up the new, right? Because if you're not starting up the new, right, there is no opportunity for change. You have to bring new skills, right? And you have to be very deliberate about forcing new skills, right, into the organization. And that might be new hires, where you simply say, hey, this is how many new hires we're going to bring into the organization that are new college grads, new thinking, new change. And many times, organizations need to be changed as well. Organizations that have been static for more than 5 years, to me, are part of their own failure is the system, structures, people, et cetera, that have been locked in. So forcibly driving change often requires the destruction of an organization to allow a new organization to emerge that becomes the one that drives to the next opportunities.
I just told Asher I'm going to disagree with him. I think you said it would be immoral to fire 58-year-olds. I think in some ways, after putting enormous effort to the kind of education and training that you're talking about, in doing everything possible to get people to understand that something has changed and their performance is not what it needs to be, I almost think if you've done the right things in effort after effort after effort to make the education you're talking about, I think it'd be immoral not to fire the person. Because I think, as Pat said earlier, if you leave someone in a job when they are demonstrably incapable of doing the job or unwilling to change, to your point, I think you're doing your organization and you're doing the other people in your organization an amazing disservice, because everyone knows it. As Pat said, it's not a secret. And I've had the unpleasant task of, on occasion, asking some of our more senior people to leave. And what I actually take as a sign of positives is all of the people that you have these discussions with know they're not doing well. And when you help them get into a different organization, a different environment, sometimes outside of Ernst & Young, where they can play to their strengths and succeed, they actually feel better about themselves as well. And so I think we actually probably agree more than we disagree on some of these things, but I think that you sometimes have to make the hard decisions.
Rebuttal.
No. I agree with you. I think that if the firm is going to fail because too many people are not doing the work, you have to do something, and that's the role of a good manager. There's no question about it. The name of the game is, again, balance. Don't think about the senior people. The senior people are probably okay, and they can. I'm talking about the regular people who may not do very well in the firm. So I think, again, the way to solve it is you should do your job as a manager, and I fully agree with you. But I think at the same time, I think government should at least encourage people to learn, train all their lives. And within every organization, and I'm sure you do it, you have to train your people all the time. And many times they'll feel they are not doing very well, and they'll live by themselves because they can do better in other places. But again, balance is the name of the game. Judith, you want to say so?
I just have a comment because you mentioned the government. Maybe I go a little bit different way in the sense that one of the amazing things, if you look around yourself, is that the government officials are controlling the highest resources that any large organization can have. And the question is what kind of training you are providing them. And I think that we should be aware about that, because sometimes we train our workers, but we don't train those that have the power to provide them things. So if you just mention it, let us be aware and maybe support the idea that training should start with those that have the control on the largest assets.
We have a backlog of questions. We'll take the next one there. Let me comment before handing it over, though, that there's very strong consensus that I wanted to highlight, which is a lot of the social and technological trends that we discussed earlier are exactly the same factors that need to have all of us and all of our organizations, governments, and others promote the retraining and the ongoing reskilling of employees. And whether we think that's private sector or public sector, however that goes about that, I think fundamentally that's the question that we need to face in this new environment, one where ongoing learning and resilience and being able to demonstrate an ability to change will only be more important since the pace of change isn't slowing down at all. So a question right over there, and then we're going to come over to the side next, please.
Hello, my name is Shirley Cantor, and I am a CSR consultant, actually corporate responsibility consultant. And I have a question about sustainability. You know that sustainability. The world is changing, and the business world is facing huge challenges of lack of natural resources and very big demographic changes, etc. And business today and business leaders have to think differently. You talked earlier about social responsibility, but I'm talking about a higher level of thinking about sustainability. It's thinking differently about business. And I find with my work with the CEOs and companies in Israel that we have a special challenge here, because Israeli used to think in a very short term, and Judith Richter mentioned it earlier, we do things now. And sustainability is thinking for the long term, is investing now in order to be able to prosper in the long term. And especially when we talk about public companies, which have to show a high value, share value in the short term, CEOs in Israel have a very big dilemma, because they have high expectations from the finance aspect, but on the other hand, maybe the social norms or the the management schools talking about sustainability. So how do you think this problem, this conflict, can be solved in the Israeli, and I guess it's not just a local problem, I guess it's a universal one. Thank you.
I do think that there's a fundamental problem in the sense that much of sustainability actually, in many regards, whether it in reality or perception, sits at odds with financial performance. right? So that, for instance, we could demand sustainable energy sources, but they're more expensive than fossil fuel sources. So if I would do the right thing for the business, I would drive up my cost of goods, right? And if I do the right thing for if I do the right thing for the environment, I'd be driving up my costs, right? And if I did the right thing for the business, I'd be driving down the environmental benefit. And I believe that there are good examples where those two are in harmony, right? And those should be highly encouraged. But fundamentally, we're expecting businesses to make business decisions, which largely are for the success, right, and the sustainability of the business, which is measured on profit and loss terms for the long term. And as I commented early, clearly employees are now wanting, right, to be part of firms that do the right things, that do the good things. So they want to be part of firms that are doing the right things, which further increases this dissonance, right? Do the right thing for society and for the environment, right? Because they want to be part of those firms, but those are not necessarily the very things that the firm is being rewarded on. And of course, this gets worse because competitors may not follow those same ethical standards, so they take the low-cost route, they're more profitable, take market share from companies that are doing the right things. So I think the key for us is, in fact, to bring those systems into harmony. Right? And we should be doing things at government levels, at state levels, international levels, to be creating an incentive that matches business objectives, right, with environmental and social objectives. Because otherwise, if those systems are in, right, conflict with each other, it's impossible for a manager to make good decisions, right? Because fundamentally, he's being held by two different yardsticks on an ongoing basis. You know, we had a very successful project at EMC for reusable packaging, right? So that we could bring our packaging back, reuse it, right? And decrease our environmental footprint, right? For our packaging, boxing, and so on by almost in half as a result. And it worked out to be cheaper as well. So the systems were in harmony, a very successful project. But I think in most cases, those are the exception and not the rule. Right? And thus we need to be working, and I think this very much is a global problem because any one business by itself only gets more out of harmony if he is doing more for the environment that doesn't match business. And thus it really has to be addressed at global levels, right? International levels with local governments, right? Industry consortiums, all of those need to be constantly working in harmony because otherwise it will be disastrous